I've always had comic ideas in my head of large stories, worlds, and fantasies, and so on. But the issue was, very few of those ideas actually turned into real comics. Why? Because I always overthought things, I never acted, and I was constantly building up these ideas but never created a plan to put them into actions. And even when I actually did make a plan to make a comic, a finished comic, I never finished it. I always would start, but then I would never finish. And this was a big problem until I came across the 5-hour comic challenge. So in this episode, I want to show you how I actually make a comic in 5 hours by actually making a comic in 5 hours and show you the step by step. So without further ado, I'm Kesh. I'm an artist, illustrator, and a YouTuber who makes comics and animations. And this is The Kesha Show. Roll intro. Alright, so it's time for me to start the 5-hour challenge. I want to set 4 hours and 30 minutes on my phone and start. Why? Because I've already done the what do you call this thing? The rough thumbnails. I've already done the rough thumbnails before, so I'm minusing 30 minutes and using 4 hours and 30 minutes to do this challenge. Check out part 1 too, if you want to know more about all these things. Alright, ready? 3, 2, 1. Alright, start. Gonna grab my pencils. Let's begin.
Game begin.
So, what is the 5-hour comic challenge, Kesh? You might ask. The 5-hour comic challenge is this. You make a finished comic, a finished 5-page comic or more in 5 hours. It's as simple as that. The comic needs to be started and finished in 5 hours. No exceptions. You cannot just say, I tried it, it was not done. No, you finish it, buddy. Now, why 5 or more pages? You might ask. Well, A, it rhymes, and B, it actually puts your perfectionism traits at bay by forcing you to not just make one of those 1 or 2 page comics, because that's what I've seen at the start a couple of years back when people did these 5-hour comic challenges where they did just 1 or 2 page mini comic strips and so on. I did not like that. I wanted to actually train myself to make more larger and bigger comics and take my bigger ideas and then put them into what I call MPDs, which is a minimum publishable draft.
What the hell is even that?
You might have heard of this term called MVP in the startup world, which is a minimum viable product for larger products. For example, an MVP of an iPhone does not actually look like the one you see. The MVP of an actual iPhone might look like something that's built by a Frankenstein doctor, because it just has its bare bones essentials and utilities in it so that people can actually see how their ideas look like in real life. So I've taken that and adapted it to the comic world, where we make something called an MPD, which is a minimum publishable draft, which basically means that the first version of the comic that you're making in 5 hours needs to be publishable. It's not good. It's not good at all, actually. In fact, it's most of the times really bad. But someone can look at that and say, you know what? I understand the story. I get it. I get that you had this idea and it's out there in real life. And that's why we call it a draft, because you can always go back to that thing and make it better. All right, so I'm done with the first page. The pencils for the first page is done. This is what it looks like. This was the rough thumbnails. Now this is the pencils. So this is what I have. So this is what I'm doing. When it comes to a 5-hour challenge, I don't have a lot of time. How much time do I have? 3 hours and 49 minutes. I have spent 40 minutes on one single page, and I cannot go at this pace. I have to actually fasten the heck up. Here's how you finish a comic in 5 hours. See, I have the spanner right here, right now. I need to draw something detailed, like the guy fighting the monster and all that stuff. Instead of doing that, I don't have much time, so I just put this one little thing of slash, meaning just a panel which just shows that, the guy is just slashing something with the sword, and then that's it. I am done with that panel. So you have to sort of find these creative workarounds in order to be able to finish things in 5 hours, or else you won't do it. That's the thing.
Broski, how do you do this challenge, man?
Well, that is what we're actually going to get into right now. The challenge basically has 3 simple steps. 1 is you think of your MPD, and 2 is to start the challenge, and 3 is to finish it. Wow, so simple. But not easy. Before you start the challenge, you got to choose your difficulty level. Do you want to do it in the first timer mode, which is the easy mode, or the player mode, which is the hard mode? The first timer mode is where you make a 5-page only comic, meaning no more pages, in 5 hours. And it should be 5 continuous hours. You start the timer, you come up with the story, the idea, everything in 5 hours, no prep before the challenge. Whereas in the player mode, things get a bit more interesting. There are some flexibility in terms of rules. The player mode is pretty much the same, but here you're allowed to make a 5+ page comic. Here you can actually do a little bit of prep before the challenge, meaning take some time to think about the story, come up with a story idea. You're allowed to do some prep in this one. In the first one, you're not allowed to do any prep at all whatsoever. The second rule changes. You don't have to finish the entire comic in 5 hours. Rather, you can actually work on specific parts of the comic for 5 hours. For example, in this entire series, I'm doing this as a player mode, where I have done some prep already in episode 1, I have done some character designs in episode 2, and then now I'm basically doing the finished pencils version of the comic in 5 hours. You can do specific section of the comic in 5 hours. And the third rule change is this: you don't have to do the entire 5 hours in one go. You can actually take your 5 hours and say split it into 2 days, where you do 2.5 hours on one day, 2.5 hours on another day. Or better yet, this is what I like, which is you can do 1 hour each day for 5 days. Now the whole idea of splitting the time is this, which is 1, you don't burn out, and 2 is you can get a higher quality of work in your comic. But note, do not do the player mode without having tried the first timer mode at least once or twice. All right, so I'm an hour and a half into the challenge. I'm a bit tired because I haven't eaten anything yet. That's also one thing. But still, when you have something like this, you look at your entire thing and ask yourself, what is the hardest page that needs to be done? Do those hard pages first, because man, you won't have the energy to do those hard pages later on. So I basically divide my comic making process into a series of very well-defined steps. When it comes to a 5-hour comic challenge, I first do the rough thumbnails, and then I do the finished pencils, and then I do the lettering, and then I do inks, flat colors, and shadows. That is my basic process when I'm doing a 5-hour comic challenge. Now, if I'm making a general comic, a general mini comic, I would actually add, say, story idea, scripting at the very start of this particular process. Also scope planning, which is another thing that I do. So these are all, say, things at the start I would add, but when it comes to a 5-hour comic challenge, in reality, the first 3 things just turn into like a 5-minute process because you have to move fast. If you're a first timer, here's the scope: 5 pages, keep it black and white, 1 simple character, 1 simple scene, 1 simple story. If you want more details on how I select the story, do the script, and design the characters and all of that, go check out episode 1 and episode 2 of this mini comic series. Right here, I'm just going over the entire thing again so that you can get an idea on how you actually make a comic in 5 hours. What's up? It's day 2. So, today's day 2. As you can see, I'm doing the 5-hour challenge by splitting it into 2 little parts because I'm a tired man who does not want to draw for 5 hours continuously. So I did 2 hours or 2.5 hours yesterday. I'm going to do another 1 hour today. So this is like the intermediate version of doing this challenge. Now you might be asking,
Kesh broski, how is this an intermediate way of doing this challenge? Well, you're sort of like a beginner doo-doo
and you're just splitting things up and doing it the easy way. How's it intermediate? Well, when you're first trying to do this challenge, you might want to do the entire 5 hours in one go. But as time goes on, your perfectionism levels have come down where you try to sabotage yourself less. So therefore, you're allowed to do the challenge in multiple segments, and that's what I recommend. But hey, by the end of the day, everything is just made up. You can just do whatever the heck you want to do. Now, the rough thumbnails is basically where you create a version of your comic with super scribbly lines and shapes that looks like it was drawn by a 3-year-old who's high on chocolates.
Maybe I've had too much.
For example, if you look at the rough thumbnail of this particular comic that I'm drawing, like this is what it looks like. You can see that there's some stick figures here and there and some blocking here and there. Also, say block in the space where I need some, say, dialogues or lettering that needs to happen. So this is the rough thumbnail of this comic. To give you a better idea, here's a rough thumbnail of Tale of Two Beasts. This one had like even more super rougher thumbnails, but when the pencil stage came in, this is what it looked like. You can see the difference between the thumbnail and the finished pencils. Most of the time is spent on the finished pencils, which is actually, I'm just going to spend the entire time of my 5-hour comic challenge right now on the finished pencils. So we're on day 3. I'm on the final stretch of this 5-hour challenge. I really like the quality that we have, but right now I just have 1 hour and 20 or so minutes left. This is another thing that you need to do during your challenge, which is you need to plan stuff. I have 1 hour and 30 minutes left, and that means approximately 20 minutes left, approximately 25 minutes per page. That's it. That's all I have. If I spend more than 25 minutes per page, because I have 3 pages, I am doomed. So that is not a good thing. So let's rush the challenge. Most artists do this very simple, very loose pencils, and then they just hand it to the inker, or they do the inking themselves and they'll just take care of it in inking. What I found is this: you cannot figure stuff out during the inking phase. You cannot just do it later. When you try to do it later, trust me, you'll be on a flow, and then all of a sudden you need to draw a hand or ink a hand. You have said this to yourself in the pencils phase where, hey, I know what, I'll figure out the hand during the inking phase. Trust me, you won't. You need to figure out how to draw those hands during the pencils phase.
What are finished pencils? Brought to you by Kesh, a look into the history of finished pencils to understand what truly makes one complete. Stay tuned.
If you've ever seen some of the old comics from Marvel or DC, you might have seen these things on the credit where they say pencils by so-and-so, inks by so-and-so, colors by so-and-so. Back in the day, people used to actually split the comic making process between multiple artists so that they can actually make a lot of comics and one person can excel in a particular thing. And one of the most important phases in that comic making process is the penciling phase, where you actually come up with the panels, the composition, the characters, how they look, the finished details, story, the backgrounds, the environments. All of these things are actually done in this finished pencil phase. I start with drawing the basic forms to get an understanding of what that thing looks like. Because every character, like I've said before, is made up of these 3D core fundamental forms. They're not shapes. I call them forms because forms have solidity to them. I take these fundamental forms and I try to put them in perspective. First, I draw them out. And most of the time, it often looks very rigid and it doesn't look dynamic. I then go on and redraw the fundamental forms, but in a much more dynamic way, with the lines flowing a bit more smoothly. Because right now, I already established the perspective, established the base. Now, I can go on top of that again and redraw things in such a way that and it looks good. Now, when you're adding details, you always need to keep your character design, near you somewhere. So rough pencils, fundamental forms, phase 1, and 2, which is your dynamic fundamental forms, and then you add details of the character. Now, this is like the advanced version of doing the 5-hour comic. When you're doing it for the first time, you don't have time for creating those characters. What you basically do is draw these shapes and call it a character. That is what you do. You don't have time for that stuff, right?
Or 20 more minutes to go. 20 minutes, not a lot of time. This is the part where you would feel like you cannot do things. You would feel like you're not good enough to do stuff.
Quite honestly, most of the things are probably true, but this is a part where you also can make it untrue. I don't think I'm good enough to right now finish this comic the way I want it to, but I'm gonna try, right? That's all we have at the end of the day. I'm gonna try. I wanna see what's possible. Okay, I think I am done right now with the major part, which is penciling all the things. Now you might think it's done, but we're not fully done. I need to finish all the lettering. Let me go ahead and finish that. So back in the day, I used to save lettering for last. I would ink the comic, color the comic, do the shadows and so on. And then it'll be lettering. You know what? I'll add the dialogues later on. Wrong. The letters won't fit inside those speech bubbles, the small tiny speech bubbles that you've drawn. You have to actually figure that particular part out as well during the finished pencil phase. So finished pencil face. That's a hard word to say. So when you're drawing the pencils for your comic, you need to actually type out the letters, or if you're writing it out, you need to write out the letters and then draw the speech bubble around them and make that as part of your composition, because that thing also adds to the beauty of the page in your particular comic. And one of the things that I follow, which is, I like to call it the Tarantino principle, which is make each page beautiful. Okay, I'm done. Hands off. We're done. All right, so I'm done. I'm done with 95% of lettering. I have two, two boxes, speech bubbles that needs to be lettered, but the words are there. It's just not the font that I like, but the challenge is done and the comic is ready. A man went to the Creator before his birth and asked for a wish. He asked, I wish to pick the kind of person I want to become. And out of the choices he had, he picked one and said, I want to be courageous. The Creator then replied, I'll give you monsters that terrify you so that you can conquer them and obtain courage. In that case, I want to be patient. The Creator then said, I'll make you work longer and harder so that you can learn to wait. I want to be wise. Then I'll give you crushing failures that will burn your spirit so that you can learn the value of good judgment. Wow, this sounds like a hard life. Can you give me a good life? The Creator then finally said, just like we measure the quality of a blacksmith by the strength of the steel he makes, I measure you by what you are at the end, not the fire and hammer it took to make you. A good life isn't a life that's easy. A good life is a life that makes you into a good person. And that, my son, is a hard life. So that will basically be the process of me making this 5-hour comic, the player version, where I just do a finished pencils version of my comic in 5 hours. So as you can see, it's done. It's beautiful. It's a minimum publishable draft that I can show to someone and they can say, oh, okay, I get it. I can understand the story. Now, the next part of this comic making process in general, if I was doing the first timer version of the 5-hour comic, I would actually go and do the inks, flat colors and shadows and make the comic even more beautiful. But I'm not doing that version. I will save the inking and coloring on how I ink and color comic pages, illustrations, and so on for the next episode. Till then, I'd like to leave you with this one little quote by the founder of Airbnb who said, "Build something that 100 people really love and not something 1 million people kinda like." So that means the comic that you're making, you make it in a way that you really loved and a whole bunch of your close friends love it. And that's the only thing that you need to keep in mind. Don't think about all the other people who needs to see your comic, look at your comic, like, no. Build something that you and a whole bunch of your close folks really love, not like, and your comic will be good. So I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.